What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the E-commerce Influence Podcast. My name is Austin Brawner, and today I'm bringing you a legend in the e-commerce space. His name's Andrew Youderian. Andrew Youderian is a well-known entrepreneur in the e-commerce space. He is the host of the E-commerce Fuel podcast. Our episode, we go deep into all things e-commerce. We talk about trends, things that we've seen come and go. Andrew is one of the first people on my podcast about 7 years ago. We dive into where we see the future of Amazon, how it relates to e-commerce, talk about brands building. We talk about kind of our projections and what we've seen from being in this industry for quite some time. I would say this is less of a tactical episode and more of a strategic episode. I think you'll get a lot out of it. And if you love this episode, I would highly recommend you check out brandgrowthexperts.com. It's my company, and join the coalition, which is our community. We talk a lot about community building in this episode as well. So I think you'll get a lot out of this. Without further ado, let's bring in Andrew. Andrew, welcome to the show. Third time guest. You were guest number 6 back in 2014. Back on the show, I think again in 2016 with a title that I look back on. I'm like, the craziest title. I don't know what I was thinking. Building a Business with Andrew Youderian was the title. Clearly hadn't got my copywriting down yet.
I probably didn't give you a whole lot to work for it within the episode. This is probably why you didn't have any good material to use.
Building a Business with Andrew Youderian. And I'm excited to have you, man. You have been one of the people in this industry for quite some time. I mean, I think the first time I met you was back at one of the e-commerce fuel events, I think in like 2014, potentially 2015. I think it was in Austin, Texas. I now live in Austin, Texas. And one of the reasons that I came here was because of your event. I had never been here before. I showed up, went to your event, had a great time, and then somehow convinced my girlfriend at the time and my wife now to move to Austin, even though she'd never been here because I had such a good time. So excited to have you here. And yeah, man, great to have you back.
Thanks. I appreciate you bringing me on here, Glutton for Punishment. And I remember that. Yeah, I appreciate you coming out to the event too, because that was the first event I ever did, or we ever did as a team. And you know, I'm sure all sorts of, amateur hour mistakes left and right, but you were kind enough to lead a breakout session. So it was, thanks for taking a flyer and coming out to Austin for some random guy's first event.
That was fun. There's a lot of relationships I look back on from that. I met Taylor Pearson, who I then connected with afterwards, did a bunch of like masterminds. He lives in Austin, Texas. It was a lot of fun. And it's funny how things have changed and grown since that time for both of us and for the industry as a whole. I guess my first question for you is back in the day, back when you started this thing, 2012, 2013, is that right?
Yeah, right around that.
Did you predict the type of growth that we're seeing today? Could you even visualize it and the e-commerce industry moving in the direction that it has? I know you're obviously betting on it growing, but what's changed, or what do you think is different than when you first kind of got into this industry?
I think everything is different. I'm a dinosaur, man. Having started ECF at least in 2012 and started my first e-commerce company in 2008. I think so much is different. I think everyone, like you said, everyone expected that over the arc of the next 10-ish years, e-commerce would grow, but I don't think, and it's hard to say too, like we're coming out of COVID, right? Where you've just seen kind of this rocket ship attached to e-commerce. And so I think it's hard to disassociate how we think about e-commerce now with even how we felt about it 18 months ago. But yeah, I think so much has changed in terms of the growth, in terms of Amazon. I never thought Amazon would do as well as it has. Like any industry, it's matured a ton. There's so much more competition. I think a lot of the old tactics, whether it's like, we kind of had, thinking about the different phases of how you'd kind of hack an e-commerce business, right? And like way back in the day, it was kind of about like hacking SEO in Google, right? For like 3 or 4 years. And then it was about, kind of a little bit of overlap, but then you could hack kind of Facebook and get cheap traffic there and arbitrage that. That's gotten a lot harder. Same thing with Amazon. You could hack Amazon and arbitrage that. You've had those 3 phases of the big 3 tech: Google, Facebook, Amazon. And I think I don't think there's any real easy, at least, straightforward hacking of those where it's nearly as easy as it used to be. So yeah, it's just been funny seeing all of those different things evolve over the years, and kind of we're in a totally different landscape. But yeah, it's amazing to see how much, because when we started, I don't know, guess maybe 10% of retail sales were on e-commerce, maybe even sub 10%. And now what are we at? 30-ish plus or minus percent, just ballparking, but maybe you have a better read on that than I do. But yeah, it's been a fun ride, man.
I love the thinking back on the different hacks, like the hacking, because I remember all of those: SEO, and then transitioning to paid social, and then Amazon as being like the biggest thing ever. You had these like incredible launches, like amazing.com, massive launches of like Amazon sellers. I want to talk about Amazon a little bit because I saw a tweet you put out a couple weeks ago, maybe even a month ago, about how much fewer of your members are now using Amazon, or like, I think if I reframe it, it was something like you added some more members and you looked at their sales, and a much lower percentage of their sales are actually on Amazon than they were just a few years ago. I've seen the exact same thing, right? People are kind of moving away from Amazon. What do you think? What is the state of Amazon for e-commerce sellers in 2021 in your mind?
The quote you're mentioning was a little anecdotal. It was, I think we added 7 or 8 members to our community that week, and I was just looking through their profiles, and all this is anonymized, of course, but I mean, the average revenue on it was, probably $4 to $5 million in annual revenue, and of all the 8 sellers, I think 1 sold on Amazon, and they sold less than 25%, generated less than 25% of the revenue from Amazon. And granted, that was just 1 week. It wasn't a huge sample size, but I've seen the same thing. And I think the state of Amazon in 2021 is still growing incredibly quickly, but I think US sellers, at least Western sellers, have realized much more poignantly that it's kind of a deal with the devil. It would be hard to start a brand new listing on Amazon right now. I think if you've got really squeaky clean, older listings with lots of reviews, with lots of good sales momentum and velocity, you can still make a great business out of it. And a lot of people, if you have a brand, especially if you have a proprietary brand, I think it makes sense in a lot of cases, not all, but a lot, to sell on Amazon. But yeah, I think people realize it's pretty cutthroat, right? Like there's a lot of risk involved, a lot of channel risk. Anyone listening to the show is going to know all this stuff, but high points are tons of channel risk, tons of overseas and out of, kind of foreign sellers that come in with, that are, oftentimes direct from the factories that are selling and listing and competing against you, counterfeit issues, worries about suspension. You have one company that can just turn off the faucet to your business overnight. And if you've got, high 6 or 7 figures in inventory, that's pretty scary. And I think the quality of goods is, I don't know, personally, when I go shop on Amazon now, if I either shop for 1 or 2 things on Amazon, either a commodity item that I just want to get, and if it fails, it's not a big deal. Maybe think like, I don't know, some coasters for cups, or some kind of like screws or hardware.
I was thinking
or
like a dish brush,
right?
Yeah.
Or something that I need really quickly from a known entity, like maybe something from Apple, or maybe something from an existing brand. But like that middle area, like that interesting kind of niche quality product discovery area, I don't know on Amazon for, or if it's something that is, if I'm looking for a quality item in the $300, $400, $500 price point, I'm probably not going to go buy it on Amazon. I think people we could do a whole podcast on just how much people trust reviews. And it's not just Amazon, right? It's like from Amazon to Yelp to like all over the board. There's so much review inflation. A lot of brands, a lot of sellers today realize that, there's some nice, you get some traffic. It's a great platform. And I think it still makes sense to test it, but I think a lot of people are realizing it's not necessarily the golden, promised land that, especially with the increased competition and risk that some people thought that it was maybe like 3, 4, or 5 years, especially even just 3 years ago.
Yeah. So. I mean, I feel similarly to you. It's been interesting seeing the arc of, nobody selling on Amazon to everybody talking about Amazon constantly because there was so much money being made from people selling stuff on Amazon, to now people realizing it's kind of a deal with the devil. And then now the state we're in, like I've had a couple clients reach out and be like, thinking about going to Amazon, and we talk about it. And it's like, well, if you do it, it seems like if you're in a competitive space, like you need to go, if you're going to do it, you need to go all in. And like, do all the stuff to be able to get, because it's so competitive that it's not like, oh, if you're in a competitive space, it's not like, oh no, we're going to try to sell on Amazon if you're coming with a fresh listing. No, you have to go like all in and figure out how to get to the top 1 to 3, or the top row of listings. And it's interesting to see that. I think I was always a little bit skeptical of the Amazon boom, just in the sense that always is fearful when you rely 100% on somebody else's traffic and on somebody else's discovery engine. Like we've kind of seen it also with Facebook right now, as the market is shifted a little bit. Now, I went on Twitter and I got posted about how I don't think I think that the privacy changes are kind of a little bit overhyped. And got just blown up by all these advertisers who are very upset with the comment. But I think maybe you fall on the other side with Facebook as we shift into some of these iOS updates. Where do you think Facebook and Facebook advertising is going for e-commerce sellers?
I have to preface this by saying paid traffic in Facebook in particular is definitely far outside my area of competence in terms of really getting in the weeds. And it's not my forte, but to just,
I would say the same for me, but I think you've got a good perspective because you've seen people using it, and you've got a lot of people in your community that are using it. And I think that's more of an interesting perspective to me than like the nuts and bolts of like how it works.
Yeah. I think one thing I have noticed, so two things I'll kind of like zoom into where we're recording this May 2021, thoughts on what I see happening right now, and then maybe a little bit more of a macro view zooming out. Right now, whether it's people spending a ton of money on ads before the privacy issues kick in or right before they did in hopes of kind of sucking out some of that last return, or whether we're on maybe a stimulus has kind of softened, the world's opening back up, people are spending less on e-commerce and more, and whatever the reason, like I've heard from a lot of people that, especially the last week or so, that things return on ad spend has been way down. It's just been, sales have been down the last month for a lot of people. Return on ad spend has been rough. So it's been an interesting I think it's a weird time to be spending on Facebook at the moment, just from, like a month snapshot time. I think stepping back, I think the same thing's going to happen with Facebook. And I don't know to what level the iOS changes are going to hurt ad spend and the ability to target and things like that. I think they probably are. They certainly are going to. The degree to which I don't know, but I think it's probably going to speed up the process, just like COVID kind of sped up the adoption of e-commerce in general. I think the iOS changes with Facebook are going to speed up people's realization that just I feel like 80% of people that are running e-commerce stores, so maybe that's a generalization, but a lot of people are kind of sharecropping in some degree or another. And so you've got public companies like, and I saw all the big three or big four just released their earnings, and they're just exploding, right? Like you keep thinking like, how are these companies are $2 trillion companies, market cap. They got to slow down, but they're just, Amazon was up 44%, right? Like Facebook was up, earnings or revenue was up, 30 or 40%, just these mind boggling numbers for the world's largest companies. And I think the way that they're doing that is I think they're just extracting more and more money out of sellers, right? Like, maybe they're growing on some level, but I think a lot of that is just the auction format is so brilliant. Google pioneered it, at least in digital advertising, and that they can just suck all of the surplus out of the system, right? Like it's brilliant if you're one of those companies. So I think it's going to be much harder. I think in 3 to 5 years, probably closer to 3, it's going to be extremely difficult to scale up a business on Facebook ads unless you have wildly good margins, like 75, 80% gross margins, or a really high lifetime value. Like I just don't see how you can do it otherwise. Yeah,
it's very interesting to see the world's largest companies be some of the fastest growing companies. Not the fastest growing, but growing incredibly fast, right? Much faster than they should. If you look at like historical returns for companies that are massive.
It's like these elephants just sprinting at like chasing cheetahs, like keeping up with cheetahs across this event. It's insane.
It's completely wild. And I think to your point of like short-term volatility, I think my take on it is like short-term volatility, long-term from the privacy standpoint. Again, I'm not like a very technical ads guy or anything like that, but I just have faith that we're going to figure out attribution and figure out how to be able to spend with better attribution in the future. And a lot of the stuff that we're talking about right now, I don't think is going to be that big of a deal. We're not going to be talking about it, I don't think, in 8 months, right? 6 to 8 months, all the like privacy changes. I think that I have faith that we're going to figure out how to be able to track sales because people are so addicted to it, right? And that's one of the things that has been interesting of watching the evolution from the SEO hacking to the paid social hacking type of e-commerce growth is you get addicted to return on ad spend, instant gratification of like, I put in $1,000 and I made $2,000. That feels really, 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 really good. I think we're going to figure out, like that isn't going away in my mind. Somehow that's going to come back and we're going to figure out how to track and maybe anonymize it. I'm not necessarily sure, but there's two options in my mind that comes back. And then I think at some point, like Facebook and Google are broken up. And I think there's a direct path towards that at this point, based on how much power they have amassed and how much of a monopoly they have over the App Store and all these different things that lead down a path of not sustainable growth in my mind for them.
Yeah, play devil's advocate on that. I'm a little bit more pessimistic. I don't think, for a couple of reasons. One, think about all the things over the last 3 to 4 years. Like at the very top, we started talking about the different ways you could hack the system, right? Like SEO still can work. The level of effort and time and energy and the quality of content and that link outreach that you have to do now to get the same amount of traffic is exponentially higher than it was even 5 years ago, right? It's gotten increasingly harder. Think about organic social. Instagram, you can still get some stuff, but think about organic social like on Facebook. It's worthless, right? Like the whole drive back in the day to get likes and stuff, totally worthless, right? And then you think about Amazon, same thing. You see that erosion. It just gets harder and harder and harder. And I think, and that is all of those happened when you had companies that were controlling their entire ecosystem. All of those decisions were made by Google putting more ads into their place, Facebook de-emphasizing the organic listings, Amazon starting to compete against you, raise fees, / more outside sellers come in. There weren't any problems with, there weren't any outside entities making it difficult. But like with Facebook and Apple, what is that? I'm just guessing. I don't know the exact number, but let's say, sake of argument, half of people who access Facebook, let's say 40% when you think about desktop, mobile, or on their phones, that's something Facebook has no control over. And that's an outside hit to their ecosystem to be able to track it for something that Apple's probably not going to budge on because privacy is kind of one of their,
it was one of the smartest moves they could ever make.
It was a marketing move. Yeah, it was a great move. And Google, I think, kind of has, followed suit because they don't want to be able to be labeled as the people that are, the anti-privacy people. Anyway, so I think on the ad spend side, like people loving spending advertising and seeing that money come back and having it be addictive, 100%, totally agree with you. But I think that's going to be harder and harder for people to do. I think they're going to start looking at their P&Ls at the end of the month more and more acutely and say, oh my goodness, we spent $50,000 on advertising and we still just, barely broke even. And then, and I think it'll hopefully get replaced with something else, but I'm not super optimistic that long-term we figure out a really good way to get returns back to where they have been historically with Facebook spend.
Oh, I totally agree. I don't think the returns are going to get back there. I think the tracking will be something that we'll figure out, right? Like, I think the tracking will be figured out. I don't think the returns are going back. I think it's going to continue to get increasingly competitive. And I think that's, I agree with you there. I mean, we've got people in our industry like Steve Chu investing massively in TikTok. Steve Chu is
on. I didn't know that he's on TikTok.
Oh, he's going in. We just released an episode and we were talking about he was talking about how he was taking dance lessons and getting into it because he sees the growth.
Steve Chu's can be doing dance moves. And this is great. This is the best gift you could have given me all day.
I'm joking about the dance lessons, but he is putting he is putting out TikTok videos And we were just talking about like, there is some level of like hacking available in that new channel, right? And every time you get a new channel, you've got opportunities and arbitrages that like happen, and then more competitors come in. And I see what you're saying. Like, I totally agree. There'll be more and more competition coming into Facebook, bigger players, returns go down, the hacking will go elsewhere. But I do think that we'll still be able to track. To your point about $50,000 a month, I had a client who was like, he's like, yeah, I spent 50 grand yesterday on Facebook, and it was like a terrible day. He's like, I just realized that I just basically gave them a full car, no return. And I think wising
pretty
up,
decent car too.
A very nice car. I think to your point of, trying to pull back in control, I think that's a trend that will continue. I look at like the valuation of Klaviyo. Klaviyo is valued at over $4 billion. And that was mind blowing to me, especially because you and I both probably should have be on the cap table. So we were there very, very early and knew Klaviyo from the back of the days when it was just Ed and Andrew. Anyway, in my mind, that's like the alternate view of where we're going, right? Klaviyo is staking out own channels and saying, hey, this is your opportunity here to figure out how to own the relationship with the customer. And again, they do charge for what they're offering, but it's not pay-per-click. It's not pay-per-click like it is in some of these other channels. So that to me is the alternate argument, and something that I'm excited about, which is like continuing, and I know something you're very excited about, continue to own the relationship that you have with your customers. Do you see any businesses that you're excited about that are doing this, or what are some of the strategies that you like around community, owning your relationship, that you're seeing this year?
Yeah, I love this. And I love disclaimer, like go way back with Klaviyo. They've sponsored our events. They sponsor my podcast. And so that, they've been a partner. So just want to put that out there so people know that context. But that being said, the reason they are is because I think they're a great company. They do, email e-commerce, I think as well as anybody, if not, definitely better than anyone. And I love that. I love that term, owned marketing, because I think it's going to be the way to build a more viable, profitable business going forward. I see, not wildly common, but it's also not super uncommon, that I'll see businesses that are doing sometimes tens of millions, $20, $30 million, and they're making almost no money because all of their money is going towards either overhead, but oftentimes customer acquisition, right? Like,
yeah,
$30 million company that's netting under $1 million, like 2% profit margin, which is just crazy when you think about the
massively stressful,
tons of overhead. When you think about this on marketing side, like slower growth, you're not going to blow up as quickly, which is, like getting back to the, kind of the addictions mindset. But I love this. It's the companies I think are going to do better going forward. And I do see more and more brands. I feel like this last year, especially, even just 2 years ago, I felt like people talking about like community in their company, like we're going to use community to build our companies. And they used it in like this kind of a ethereal, abstract way that oftentimes just meant we have customers that maybe tweet
or we
about
have Facebook groups.
Or we have Facebook groups, right? Like, but or not even just a Facebook group, just like a Facebook page and people comment on our stuff, right? But I'm seeing much more of an intentional focus on people actually building genuine communities. This shirt right here from a company called Pistol Lake, I love their shirts. He's an ECF member. He actually was on the podcast recently, and they've they've grown part of their business through a loyal base of Redditors. They created a subreddit and they connect with them there. There's a company that we're hopefully going to close an investment with here in this following month that has built a brand almost with zero paid traffic. Not zero, but very small. If you think about percentage of their revenue, it's a tiny percent. Maybe 10% or less, or 5% or less comes from their paid spend. And it's largely coming from a couple of things, a little bit email, a lot of organic social on Instagram. But the thing that I'm excited about is a private Facebook group with a good amount of engagement and a really good, vibrant, like SMS list. Seeing a lot more people driving meaningful traffic with SMS versus, I feel like that's matured to the point where people are seeing really good results from that if you do it well. I think Ben Holtz over at Beard Brand has done a really good job with his community in terms of having that, like fostering relationships, doing events. He's got a private.
He's got these incredible YouTube channels. That's very interesting to me. That there aren't a ton of e-commerce brands that are doing it YouTube or like organic YouTube very well. They're one of them, and it's cool to see the snowballing returns from YouTube.
Yeah, they do it. He's done phenomenally well on YouTube, and he's been doing it for years, and just kind of putting in the reps. So I think I love this. What I think about like companies that hopefully in the future we're trying to look to do future investments in, and I think that have promise. They're companies that have a lot of repeat business that are ideally aren't on Amazon, although again, that doesn't always have to be the case, but have a lot of repeat business, a lot of repeat customers coming back, so you don't have to keep spending for them over and over. Having some kind of community element is really interesting to me, and good margins. And so I think those are the kind of businesses that I think we're going to see businesses that aren't going to get as big as quickly. I think it's going to be harder to grow really fast because you can't ramp up as quickly with advertising and be quasi-profitable or even break even. But I think there'll be stronger businesses in the long run. So I think we'll see a shift to the type of businesses that happen unless we find some other, I'm sure it'll pop up some other hackable channel, but at the moment, it seems like those are fewer and further between right now. It's just kind of some of I feel like almost in some sense, we're kind of going back to the roots where you build a business through like kind of hustle, through getting to know customers, through reputation, through word of mouth, like at least if you want to do it profitably, and not that you can't strategically use paid ads, but it's just getting harder.
I think I'll play the other side on whether or not companies are going to be able to get as big as quickly. I agree with a lot of the stuff that you say, and I think that all of those things are incredible aspects of building like a long-term sustainable business. I think the blowing up and getting super big, super fast side, I think we're still in this time of massive asymmetric returns where like you can come in as a category leader, and it's not just the paid social that gets you to grow so fast, right? Like we've looked at companies come in, they sign celebrities. A lot of these celebrities, I think that's one of the things that I'm excited about going forward is like pairing brands being started with celebrities who already have an audience that they have built over a long period of time. I think those are the companies that are going to grow incredibly fast, much faster than anybody else, because they have that audience and they're tapping into it, and they can maybe fuel with advertising in a way that other people can't, because it's again, permission-based marketing. You want to be marketed to by George Clooney, for example, or The Rock, for example, about his alcohol. And that leads to this incredibly fast growth and like asymmetric returns where it goes to just one or two of these, a few brands that grow really, really fast. And the rest are probably, in my mind, filling into the other side of like slower growth sort of thing. That's my take on it. That's one of the things I've been noticing and thinking about.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think if you have an existing audience, it's a really good time to be an incumbent with an audience because it's getting harder to make them. And it's just, yeah, I totally agree. But most people, I think the vast majority of people listening to this and starting businesses aren't going to be The Rock, or they're not going to have a big audience.
I think you can partner. I think that's one opportunity. If you're looking at this and you're like, well, how do I grow like we used to? I think there's some partnership opportunities that weren't there in the past, but now are there. And it's more like, if you're going to think really big, I think there's opportunities, but it requires thinking a little bit differently and not being able to like maybe spend your way profitably, right? Like that's one of the, I had Griffin from Pure Vita Bracelets on the podcast a while ago. And I was like, what was your strategy early on with paid social? He's like, oh, well, our strategy was 2-to-1. Like we would just, if we could get $2 for every $1 we put in, we would just max it out. And like, that was basically the strategy early on. And that worked for them for a long time because the competition wasn't as strong as it is today. They were on kind of the leading edge. They'd done a ton of organic stuff. And because of because they had to make it work on the organic side, it was, which I think to your point of like all these things working together, if you can make it work on the organic side, that first. Then if you fuel it with some paid advertising, you're typically in a much better spot to be able to gain some of the returns from it.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's so the peer review, when he was 2-to-1 return on ad spend, is that what you're saying? Or 2-to-1, they'd like
on all their marketing. They're like, if we could put $100 in and get $200, then that was how they made the decisions.
Got it. Interesting. Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think paid ads are going away anytime soon. It's just it's
a bloody messy market out there.
it'd be a hard time to start from scratch unless you had an audience or you could partner up with someone, and at least it grows quickly. So. Yeah, I would love to, I'd really love to see some kind of new entrant or marketplace or something. I feel like it's been a while. It always happens, but it's, because it's always fun hacking and arbitraging and getting into doing those kind of things. But it'd be fun if some other stuff popped up that was viable for e-commerce, because I feel like it's been a while since we've had a fun thing to go hack and to be able to do that with.
I think TikTok is one. TikTok is one for sure. Like, it's still early days, and I don't know how much time you spend on TikTok, but it's way more addictive than Instagram, way more addictive than Twitter. I think that's something that has a lot of opportunity and upside.
Do you see, so I've thought about this a little bit. And one thing too, when you're thinking about looking at like different potential channels to get in on, you're taking bets as well, right? Like, cause it takes time to go build up an audience on TikTok and also on Clubhouse or whatever all these other channels are. And so you're kind of trying to de-risk it a little bit, so there's some potential there, obviously, and still try to get in before the masses do. So one thing I try to look at is if there's anyone that I know that's actually generating meaningful revenue, or even just noticeable revenue from a platform, like, think about like Walmart.com and stuff. Like, I've talked to dozens of people. I have heard almost no one that has seen meaningful traction from Walmart, right? So like, is it worth the risk reward for someone who's thinking about it? Probably makes sense to at least spot one or two people where it's working before they jump in. Have you seen many meaningful people actually generating any kind of meaningful revenue off of TikTok to their e-commerce store?
Yes, but it's very specific, right? So the examples that I've seen, there are some like it, but it's usually like influencer partnerships where there's this girl who, she did some dance with these like high-waisted yoga pants, and they were sold out worldwide, like instantly, right? Like, that's the type of reach where it's like they were a new product. She had them, she talked about them, and just exploded sales because it went incredibly viral. I think that it's like, it's where the opportunity is. Does your product match the people that are on TikTok right now? And does it also match the type of, like, we got to remember back when Instagram first started, it was all photographers, right? Like, that's what it was. It was just photographers posting. And when TikTok first started, it was just people dancing. And now it's evolving and changing and growing. And so we're not sure where it's going to go yet, but as that market changes, I think a lot of the products that we think wouldn't sell on TikTok are going to sell on TikTok. And that's what's interesting to me. It's like, what works now is not going to be what works in a year from now. And I don't think it makes sense for you to go build a massive TikTok audience if you're selling like car parts. It's probably not going to work, right? But if you have something cool and unique that matches up, then there's some potential opportunity there. That's what I've seen.
Steve Chu waltzing and dancing with a starter in his hand over to an old vehicle and putting it in. Steve, that's the kind of content I would love to see on TikTok. I'll buy something from you if you do it.
I do like that you were like, when I told you Steve was taking dance lessons, you're like, this is incredible.
I was going to sign up and just daily get my morning coffee, sit down, troll him on TikTok for at least a good 15 minutes. It would have been a great way to start the day.
If you guys don't know Steve Chu, he friends of my wife, Quit Her Job podcast, and friends of both Andrew and I. I got a question for you. It's a hard-hitting question. I've never asked. I don't think I've asked you this before. What happened to the e-commerce fuel job board?
It is no longer with us. We ran that for about a year, a little over a year-ish. And with the goal being to have a very curated list of kind of D2C and e-commerce jobs from interesting companies, highlight the companies, show their personality a little bit more. And Yeah, we just made the hard decision at one point after we'd grown it a little bit, based on the work involved, based on how much we could differentiate ourselves versus some of the other players. Like, think about jobs. Like, there's a lot of people in the job market. LinkedIn, you've got Indeed, you've got ZipRecruiter, these huge companies. We just made the decision based on the traction we were seeing, based on how much time it was taking, based on the business model, and also based on, is this the best place to be spending our time versus investing back in the community, that it probably wasn't something we want to keep investing into. And it's always hard when you get to that point. You don't know, like, are we giving up too early on something because we're just being wimps and we forgot how hard it is to start anything, to just get that momentum, which is very valid. And there's certainly a very real possibility we did that. Or are we making a wise decision here and not just, sending, good time and money after bad, and this is the right call. And ultimately we made the latter one, and we kind of axed it. So that's kind of what happened to it. It was good to do for a while. It's funny because now I feel like in the last month or two in our community, I've probably had more and more people, and I think this is a function of the labor market right now and how hard it is to find particularly talent like in tech and e-commerce. I think it's getting more challenging to hire. Like, people are like, what happened to the job board? Where is it? And we've thought about just opening it back up just purely as a kind of a public listing place and a service for our community members, not necessarily a business model, but just a way to help our members advertise their positions. But yeah, that's kind of what happened to it. Just, we did it for a year and a half, decided we weren't as differentiated enough as we could be, and that we was maybe potentially a distraction, and we made the hard decision to close it down. So
yeah, we got lots of stuff going on. I was interested because it makes sense in something that hiring is such a huge part of growing your business, and especially in the last year with so much growth in the e-commerce space, all my clients are looking to hire people, and we've been going elsewhere. But it was just interesting to see that came and went, and I think somewhat it's making decisions about also like lifestyle, right? Like, if it's a really challenging thing to build, and you can put your time and energy elsewhere. Like, I totally get it.
It's hard to know how much to stretch yourself and grow and take on more things to get better, and also not, have scope creep and do too many things. One of the things I think on hiring is tricky is, like, I think the original vision for it was, hey, we got an e-commerce platform, we have some job leads, we can populate it with some jobs from our members of our community. We were sourcing probably, even with a community of 1,000 members, we were sourcing probably 95% of our jobs from just going out and finding them online. And originally I thought given we had the platform, we could just put it up there and it could kind of slowly start seeing some traction. But you think about hiring is really hard. And to do something, to hire well and to offer real value in the hiring service, either need to be a recruiter, which is wildly time intensive and wasn't the model, or like the guys over at friends over at Dynamite Jobs and Tropical MBA, Dan and Ian and their team, like, they're doing something cool with Dynamite Jobs, which is all remote, but they also screen candidates for you, and they do much more of a vetted process so that you can. It's more of a value add than just, hey, post your job here and people will read it. And again, we weren't prepared to get into that level of the business model.
Yeah.
So I think it was a realization of, this is harder than we thought. We're not as differentiated as we thought, and we probably are as committed to doing the 3 times the amount of work to actually add value. So
makes sense. But
thank you for mentioning it and calling me out on it. That's good.
I just haven't talked to you for a while, so I was interested. So you're in the community. You're surrounded by lots of entrepreneurs like I am. What are some new ideas, apps, tools, anything that you're excited about, been thinking about, that have popped up recently that you can share?
Yeah, I think that I've been excited about and I've seen in the community, and again, not to beat a dead horse, we kind of touched on earlier, but it's just the growth on the community side for brands, Reddit, Facebook groups, people having kind of building communities through their SMS lists and engagement that way. I feel like that's the biggest thing I've seen and the most exciting thing I have seen in terms of growth opportunities and prospects going forward.
What do you see the future of Facebook groups look like?
That's a really interesting question. I don't know. I think it's a little scary because
Terrifying to me.
Because there's so much, Facebook doesn't have a great track record in this area. They spent so much time telling people to invest in building up their organic followings, and then they just pretty much completely cut them off at the knees, you know? I think there's still, if Facebook was smart, they would protect them. They wouldn't dilute them. They would add some features and some functionalities in for monetizing them. To be able to, just like Apple did with podcasts just now, to be able to set it up. And I don't think, do you know if they have that? I don't think they do they, for Facebook groups? Like a native way to be able to charge your subscribers or have them contribute financially to what you're doing?
I don't know. I think that there was talk about that at some point, but I don't know whatever happened to that.
Yeah. I mean, if they did that, I think that would be really cool. There's a lot of people I know that are on that have Facebook groups that I know one person that runs a 7-figure e-commerce business purely based on a Facebook group. No ad spend, no organic traffic, 100% on their Facebook group. So there's a lot of room there if Facebook wanted to get creative and be able to build out their own little platform and ecosystem there. And it's so powerful because it shows up like having I think the best way to do it is to have your own platform, your own form. Like for our community, we have a form that we've spent unholy amounts of money like customizing and building up. We control it completely. We don't have to, there's no gatekeeper, but it's so much harder. It's just like the Amazon argument. It's so much harder to get people to it, to also build the habits to have people come, and so many people are on Facebook that. So yeah, I don't know what the answer is. I think it could go one of two ways. I think Facebook could get greedy and start chopping off, this would be short-sighted, start chopping off your reach and start charging you to promote posts in your groups and that kind of stuff, which would be a nice little short-term bump, but would kill the little communities, the little sub-communities of which there are so many Facebook groups. Or if they were smart, I think they would give people tools to monetize it, keep the reach there, fight the urge to, do a pay-to-play thing and create a really cool ecosystem. They could create an entire sub-ecosystem of just Facebook groups. I think that'd be fascinating if they did that.
I think so too. I think apps like Circle are pretty cool. Have you looked at Circle yet? They basically took a lot of the style of Facebook and like the Facebook group style. So it looks very similar, but then you own your own community. It's like I would consider it like Shopify for communities. So hosted, like a hosted kind of cart sort of thing. It's very interesting. And I can see them trying to take over that market a little bit. And just knowing that there's a future where this isn't going away, like sub-communities, subgroups are only continuing to grow. And the track record of Facebook is not good. If you ever have success on Facebook, it's like, there's like an axe just waiting to just chop your head off because they're coming at some point for whatever you're doing, and that's been pretty consistent.
I'm looking at Circle right now, and I've seen a couple of platforms like this before. I think you're right. Yeah. Like you think about, we talk about all the different kind of periods in e-commerce growth and just the internet in general, different Google dominance, Amazon dominance, Facebook dominance. And right now, like there's the content marketing phase, like all these different, epochs of, if an epoch can be like 2 or 3 years, probably can't. But I think the one that we're kind of getting into now is there's so much information out there. There's so much good content out there. People aren't looking for content as nearly as much. People are drowning in content. There's way too much stuff to read relative to what you have time for. What people are looking for is like really good personal connections and curated communities and people and peer groups that they can drop into, right? Like same thing with social. People are connecting. It's not hard to connect with people. It's you're drowning in connections again. And what's harder is finding the right connections, the right people. So yeah, I think companies like Circle, I think they, assuming their tech's decent, will do really well. These small communities will keep growing. I think there's going to be a ton of value add, not just e-commerce communities, not communities powering e-commerce, but just in like much smaller micro communities in general, kind of going forward, because I think that's what people don't have as much of. And it's kind of like curated, just like a news feed an RSS feed used to curate your news for you. Same thing for your social life. It's just getting, especially online, it's getting a lot harder to do that. And I think there's there's so much value in having a great group of people that you can just drop into and you have a lot of relevance and in common with, and there's a good quality standard there.
I think the big factor that we're not talking about is trust. And one of the reasons why I think this is like, it's time for like a continued rise of the individual. And the reason I said celebrities earlier, or like large scale people that have reach, it's because one thing that's happened over the last year for me, and I think for a lot of people, it kind of trust in institutions has deteriorated to levels that I don't remember. Right. And the less trust you have in institutions around you, well, that shifts towards individuals. At least that's what I've seen, right? Like I look at like I look at the fallout from the last year, and there's been individuals who have increased in trust for me, and institutions have almost across the board dropped in trust. You can parallel this to what's happening in China. And China, I think they're ahead of us in terms of lack of trust in institutions. There's very little trust going on in China around like the state, institutions, all these different things. And influencer marketing and individuals dominate in China. And it's because, well, if one person that people believe in says that this formula is good, like baby formula, and your trust is incredibly low for everything else that comes out of government regulations, well, you're going to choose from this person because you actually trust the individual. That to me is what is interesting with the community parallel with individuals. It's like the rise of like micro community influencers. And I hesitate on the community side because I don't know if people necessarily want community, or like, I think that they do, but I think for me, it's more of like the trust side of thing. That it's like we're moving into an era of, if you can find and be trustworthy, if people can find you and they find that you're trustworthy, that currency is massively I think it's undervalued right now, and it will only increase in value over time.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm curious. I got to ask you a question, and feel free to punt on this, or if it's overly personal or political, which maybe I'm opening up a bee's nest here, but I think it's a cool question, and I'm happy to reciprocate too. You mentioned that there've been a couple individuals that you've trusted more this last year.
Yes.
I'd be curious to hear like who those people are. Just wondered, even just one of those people, and why, what led to.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's interesting. Most journalists that I trust are journalists that have been fired. I think that the more right?
Sorry, that's a great quote.
But I think I look back over the last year and I'm like, the people who have left, resigned, or been fired from large institutions, I feel like cut closer to the truth, right? And there's people like somebody like Matt Taibbi, or like Barry Weiss, who was fired from resigned or fired from New York Times. Been interesting to see like reporting that has shifted away from like the institutions that I normally would have trusted. I look at and I'm like, well, the people that are originating from those institutions that have broken out because they felt like they couldn't actually report the truth are people that I trust a little bit more. And then, throughout, it's been interesting over the period of the last year, there's been people that have been consistently right, I think, about COVID. And it's interesting because we're in a time at the beginning and the end where there are people that were right at the beginning who are terribly wrong at the end. And there are people that were wrong at the beginning who are incredibly right at the end. And if you are in a position where consistently you've like looked at science and adjusted your viewpoint, well, then I'm more likely to trust that person. And again, that doesn't mean that in the future I will trust them about other things, but I recognize that their judgment is strong. Somebody like David Sachs is very interesting. I like listen to him, and a lot of the stuff I agree with what he talks about, and I feel like he's one of the more thoughtful people in the room.
Interesting.
How about yourself?
Yeah, I'll answer your individual person question in just a second. One thing I want to say on what you said, like on the reporting and the side, I've always thought it'd be really fast. I'd pay for a service like this where most news that you read, everyone has a bias, implicit or otherwise. And whenever I try to read something, if you read the New York Times, it's probably going to be somewhat of a left slant. If you read something like the Wall Street Journal, it's probably going to be a little bit more of a right slant. So you're always kind of thinking and reading. And I think if you're critically doing it, you should be doing that. But it'd be phenomenal if there was, and granted, good journalists, of which there are many, actively try to write in a way that is even, leaving their personal bias behind and trying to write as objectively as possible. If they're, a good quality journalist, of which they're definitely out there. But I would love to see a publication where either they just listed facts with no adjectives, like you could almost like adjectives were like outlawed, or even better, every single article that came out had two co-authors, one that leaned a little bit to the left, one that leaned a little bit to the right. They could serve as like fact checkers for each other. And if they both signed off on the article, it's not a perfect system, but I think it'd be a cool system to say like, hey, if both of you can agree with the substance of this article, it's fairly, reasonably objective, or at least, I think it'd be a great filter. So that'd be cool. So someone wants to start that, and I'll be your customer number one. That
actually sounds a lot easier than an e-commerce job board. I think maybe that's something you could tackle.
I'll think about that. I think the person that built up more credibility and trust this year for me was Mitt Romney. I thought he just was I respected the fact that he kind of bucked his party, sometimes in difficult ways, to stand up for what he thought was right. And I just thought I just respected the way that he kind of dealt with everything that went down this year. Even when he kind of had to break ranks to do that. And I thought that took a lot of character and guts, and his stock went up in my book. So for sure. It's interesting how the fallout of taking a very unpopular stance can actually come around. When something happens, you don't really know what the actual impact it's going to be is until way after. Often you don't know till 6 months, 8 months, a year after. And it's interesting the stances people took early on and how they've ended up being either right or wrong later down the road. And the impact of that stance at the time may have led to like massive popularity or massive canceling or massive, hate. But down the road, it actually might come out looking really, really good. I think it's interesting because I think Romney took a ton of heat, but I would say most people probably feel that way. I'm not sure about that, but a lot of people probably feel the same way that you're talking about. I think the takeaway for me from this podcast is I need to go out, partner up with Mitt Romney to start an e-commerce brand and also a news publication that
I think
is,
so.
Just with co-authors on every artiandrew. That's what I'm hearing. You're telling me.
Where you just report facts, because that people definitely will always agree with you on those. Andrew, it's been awesome, man. I really appreciate you hopping on, chatting with me. It's been a lot of fun. I would love to ask you one last question, which is, if you were in my shoes today as an esteemed e-commerce podcaster, what would you have asked yourself that I did not?
I would say, Youderian, what's the deal? You've been doing this podcasting thing for eons, and you still have this super ghetto background. Look at me. I got plants. I got like the professional earbuds. I look like I got it together, and you just look like you're the Unabomber in a basement somewhere. When are you going to drop $300 and get a decent podcasting studio is what I would have asked me.
When are you going to do it?
I'm in the process right now of building a little home office, which is taking way longer than I had anticipated, but it's a fun process. And so kind of built it with the idea of like right now, you got beautiful natural light. You look legit over there in your little studio. And so kind of built it with that in mind. So yeah, hopefully in the next 6 months, we'll have a permanent base that can do a little bit more. I heard someone say once, I'm sure a lot of people have heard this, but like, in the age of COVID and Zoom, like a nice professional polished Zoom background and setting, a great camera, good audio, good light is kind of like akin to an Italian suit, 10 years ago or even 3 years ago. Right. Which I think is kind of true. So,
makes sense.
Yeah. So,
hopefully next time we do this on the YouTube video, you'll be in like a Ready Player One suit and with Minority Report gloves, and you're like with like a massive screen, and you'll just be making all the deals, cutting all the deals.
Perfect. I will. I'll see if I can add that to the home office. I'm sure it won't increase the budget too much there.
Awesome. Thanks for joining, man. And if you guys have not listened to Andrew's podcast, check out E-commerce Fuel podcast. It is, how many episodes have you done now?
400-ish, 375, somewhere in there.
That's freaking awesome. What's the best episode? If somebody was like to go and if you were to pick one or two, what would you recommend to somebody who's listening?
God, that's a hard one. I did a great episode with a guy named Kevin Stecco, who talked about shrinking his business to increase the profitability. I oftentimes just see, like we're alluding to earlier, so many businesses get big and don't make a lot of money. He's got very intentional about shrinking his business to make more money. I love that episode.
Cool.
Also did an episode way back in the day where I kind of documented a family trip, kind of in this old van that we have out to the coast with my family and back. That was a fun one too. So I don't know if those are my two favorite of all time, but those definitely come to mind, and happy to give you some links for those in the show notes. So
awesome. Andrew, thanks so much, man, for hopping on, and I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks. One more thing. Can I give just one little flyer? If people are listening and you like e-commerce and you have an e-commerce business, 7-figure plus e-commerce business, would love to. We've got a community of about 1,000 members that the secret sauce is just everyone inside is vetted. They're running a real business. They've got a lot of experience. We toss out trolls and people who just are generally unpleasant and awful human beings to try to just make it a great curated environment for people chatting about stuff. So if you're in the trenches and you want to connect with, we're talking about communities this whole time, you'd like to plug into another group of store owners, would love to hear from you. So
awesome. Yeah. That was the event I went to 8 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, something like that in Austin. Led me down here. So
crazy. It's been that long.
Awesome, Andrew. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Austin. This was fun.